So I'm excited to really introduce my guest this evening. It's Dana McCorvie, also known as the ingredient inspector. For decades, Dana has worked with many of the top food manufacturers in the world. Fortunately for us, her many years of collaborating with the food science experts has led her to an unquenchable curiosity about ingredients and nutrition. So after years of researching what we're all eating and drinking, she provides unbiased, deeply researched reviews and solutions for us. So I know everyone is going to love Dana. Welcome, Dana.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm really happy to be here.
Oh, we're grateful. So I have scoured your website and we will go there in a few minutes to show everybody how wonderful it is to be able to be our own researchers through your hard work. So we can look up products there. But tell me what got you to this point, Dana.
My whole background has been, I've been in food marketing for over 38 years, working with, as Catherine said, a lot of the largest food companies in the country, which almost by definition are the largest food companies in the world. After decades of working with them, I ended up in a situation where I realized that my knowledge, what I wanted to do with it was to help consumers make better decisions or more informed decisions, whatever is best for them, really, to have that information from a very unbiased and expert resource.
Are you working with a team? Are you doing all this yourself?
It's primarily me, and then I have just had a few different interns that sort of have come through and go through who are students in nutrition.
Okay.
But it's basically me. Like, I am the ingredient inspector, but my vision for the organization is much larger than myself.
What is the vision?
The vision is for, what ingredientinspector.org does in terms of providing consumer solution is to identify the manufactured foods and beverages whose ingredients are closest to those we would use at home if we were making that item at home from scratch. So like if you were making salsa at home, what would you put in it? So by definition, none of those things need to be in a jar of manufactured salsa. What are those salsas that are closest to homemade?
See, I love this so much because everyone who knows me knows I'm all about real food. And this is essentially what you're helping us with. So
yes.
in this real world, there are times that we might just feel like, but I am too busy right now with whatever's going on to do all my cooking from scratch. So you have provided a way for us to really look at these things and say, okay, if I'm not going to make all my food from scratch, at least I can look at these and say, well, here's how I can go shopping then.
I created a concept. It's very simple. You don't need to be an expert like I am. You just look at a food label and you say, if there's anything in there that would never be in my kitchen to make this, then it doesn't need to be in there. So you don't feel like you need to know what, sodium, ethylene, what these things are. It's not a matter of knowing what they are. It's a matter of knowing, that they're not, and they're not in your kitchen. So they don't need to be in this item. And the beauty of it is that for almost every category, there are products that have no ingredients not in kitchen. So that's how I look at it. So it's a very black and white thing. Either your product is closest to homemade or it isn't. If it contains any of these items, and there's actually a list of ingredients on the website so that, all closest to homemade products don't contain any of these ingredients. And there are big general ones, like there are no added colors or added flavors or chemical preservatives or hydrogenated oils. But then there's a lot of, tiny detail that depending on what product you're talking about, certain, undesirable ingredients can appear. And so that long list is actually pretty long of banned ingredients. But as I said, there are sort of generalities of items that are never there.
And then there is also the struggle with finding a product and you've read the label, you've checked it out, this is healthy, but somewhere along the line, the company is sold to another company, and the consumer is not going to know this. And then they've quietly changed the ingredients. And so most of us wouldn't even think like, well, I have to keep rechecking that label. But you do that for us.
Yes, well, only a very small percentage of consumers actually read labels at all, which is fascinating, but a very, very small percentage, read them continuously, every time that they purchase the product. And that really is a very high bar, if you're going to keep doing that. The beauty of that is that there are some companies that will never change because of the integrity of who they are. And as you said, though, once they're purchased, a completely different dynamic takes place where, I have a lot of case studies of products that have been acquired, the product gets acquired, and then slowly this sort of de-evolution of things changes. I actually was the first to notice that Whole Foods started changing their ingredients once they were acquired by Amazon. And that was the piece that NBC picked up, because that's obviously big news. I mean, Whole Foods is, one of the standards of identity for ideally healthy foods. But since the acquisition by Amazon, I've seen the ingredients in many of the different offerings they have slowly be compromised, which is, disconcerting and sort of hurts my heart. But, it is, that's the reality of what it is. So all of the data on ingredientspector.org is less than 12 months old, and it's annually updated. So any review that you see, that data is going to be less than a year old, but it will also be updated within a year of whatever date it had been last reviewed. Because that's, as Catherine said, that's part of the point, is that things change. So I have, every month products fall off of the closest to homemade list. But the good news is I also have products that move on to it, like I know that they're reading us. And so we've seen a lot of good changes take place as well. So that's always good news.
That is very good news. I think when people start in with my food challenges and everyone is starting to read labels for the first time, trying to give up the sugar, the artificial sweeteners, all the chemicals, they realize that their cabinets are really full of this and they didn't know. And so then it is a challenge, especially in today's economy, to throw out food that they know they paid good money for. And then you've got this decision that, well, I paid money for this, and now I know it's not good. And so do I finish off what I have or not? And that, I know, is it's an issue for a lot of people until they get that turnover in their cabinets, and then they're just buying the cleaner, healthier foods. Well, let's take a look at your website. So if we look at the menu bar, you can see Dana has product reviews, rapid reviews, closest to homemade, her banned ingredients that she was just talking about a moment ago, ingredient changes. So let's go through a little bit of this. So the product reviews, if we start here, we're at that home page, and she's got some fun things for you to like. Let's look at taco seasoning. And so again, which ones are closest to homemade? Those would be the ones that we know then are ones that we do want to purchase, right? So,
and you'll see, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Catherine, but you'll see the first thing I do is note, like, well, if you made it at home, what would be in it? You just sort of pass that.
Oops. Okay.
Right, because so that's the reference point. If I was making this seasoning at home, what would I put in it? So by definition, like, nothing else needs to be in there. Like, that's how I approach it. And then I'll look at the leading brands. Sorry to interrupt you, Catherine.
No, I want you to, because you know your website so well. So of course, Old El Paso, that's a familiar brand. And I didn't realize that was associated with General Mills. Interesting. But you can see then what Dana has written about the Not in Kitchen products. Go ahead and interrupt at any time, Dana, if you want to talk more about that.
Well, it's a simple, like I said, it's a very simple thing. And that's why you can do this yourself. You look at that label, which is the ingredients are listed under it, and you go like, why is there silicon dioxide in this taco seasoning mix? Like, even if I don't know what that is, clearly I do not want that. And that's nothing that I've ever had in my kitchen. So it doesn't need to be there. And not only from a health perspective, but from a financial perspective, people are paying for ingredients which don't need to be there. And of course, they cost money to the company. So it's factored in along the way. So why pay for ingredients that don't even need to be there? I mean, that's the financial benefit of closest to homemade.
I've noticed with many of these products too, they're changing. It used to be genetically modified. Now there's a new word, bioengineered, things like that. So when I see modified cornstarch, the corn makes me wonder, is that genetically modified? It
Well,
is.
I mean, 94% of US corn is genetically modified.
Right.
So if you see corn anywhere, it's probably GMO corn, but that's not what modified cornstarch means. That's not a different
No,
word for.
but if it has the word corn in there, it just sets me off because I know corn generally is, for anyone who's trying to not have genetically modified food.
Yes, like I just said, yeah, 94% of US corn is genetic. So that's corn for the most part.
But it's
Is
an
gonna be
interesting
GMO corn.
switch on the labels. We're
I'm
expecting,
sorry?
it's an interesting switch on the labels in the last year. Instead of genetically modified, they're often calling them bioengineered, and people don't.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happens is that food companies become, aware of things that consumers see as red flags, and they can slowly sort of migrate to a different, conceptual term or something that doesn't have as much consumer baggage with it. For example, MSG is something that the majority of consumers now know is bad. So a lot of products have switched to yeast extract, which just sounds like a form of yeast, which makes bread rise, but that's not what it is at all. It's actually a flavor enhancer akin to MSG. It contains glutamates just like MSG does. So a lot of companies have switched from MSG to yeast extract, which, as I said, consumers' eyes sort of just pass by because unless you actually know what it is, you just perhaps think it's, like I said, a form of yeast, but it's not.
So let's go into rapid reviews.
These are just a little bit shorter and tend to be branded items that semi-horrify us, and so we review them.
Okay, because we've talked here in this group before, often people think this is cheese and it's not cheese. It's a pasteurized prepared cheese product. And I love that you did this one. Let me scroll down. And I want to show everybody too that you can click on it and you can save the image. Then you can post it on your social media very easily. And Dana's mark is right here, so everyone would know it's from the ingredient inspector, so she would have credit for it. So I posted this one yesterday, Dana, and somebody said, oh yeah, that Kraft cheese. I'd sure like to know what they make their macaroni and cheese sauce with. So I replied with your picture of the macaroni and cheese one.
Oh,
So
you're
there
funny.
you go.
Well,
All
I
right.
worked at Kraft for 8 years, so these kinds of things are very disconcerting. But if you scroll back up, what I tend to do is include, the genesis. I mean, at one point, Kraft was the master blenders of cheese. Like this was the origin of Kraft cheese. I mean, it was closest to homemade once upon a time, but a lot of their products are not anymore. Now, Kraft, they do make products that are closest to homemade, but this is not one of them.
And that is an old ad. I love it.
Yeah, I like to do a now and then comparison when I can. When I can find the actual product, I do that a lot. There's a whole section, there's a whole post on, what a product contained then versus now. And the very sad news is that, except one exception that I have found, every single number one product in the US has changed its ingredients, like since its genesis, decades ago, because the number one products in the US are decades old for the most part.
I love the search bar. So I wonder if I put just honey and search. Things might be a little slow and funky because of being on the Zoom. Okay, here it is. So let's look at this. Honey Nut Cheerios. We know that
It's
one's
just, this is a perfect example of a base brand's, what they call a nutritional halo. The nutritional equity of Cheerios, the yellow box, I mean, that was the only Cheerios that was around for decades, and it actually has some nutritional integrity to it. It has 1 gram of sugar per serving, and it doesn't have a lot of stuff, it's basically a pretty good cereal. But the Honey Nut, the line extensions of Cheerios, I mean, the places they have taken that brand is just, it's staggering. And the idea that, oh, there's the then versus now comparison, that a little bit lower. When Honey Nut Cheerios originally came out, it contained real almonds, hence the name. Today, Honey Nut has become sort of a flavoring conceptually, and it's primarily because of Cheerios. And Honey Nut Cheerios now has no nuts in it. And so once the leader of any given category makes a move, the products which are also following it will make that move as well. They'll be like, well, Honey Nut Cheerios took the nuts out and look at their business. And so one of the Whole Foods changes that I realized was that Whole Foods used to be closest to homemade because it actually had real almonds. And then when we went back to do the update, it didn't have the almonds anymore. It now had natural almond flavor, and flavoring is not in kitchen. And especially if you used to have real almonds in it. And so it fell off the list. And that was sort of the beginning of discovering that Whole Foods was changing their ingredients. But, Honey Nut Cheerios is an example of, General Mills is going to take that brand, wherever the consumer lets them. And, a lot of kids and a lot of people, I mean, there's a heart healthy message on the front of the Honey Nut Cheerios and in the advertising for Honey Nut Cheerios. But the idea that it has more sugar than Fruit Loops, I'm going to guess like 0.0001% of the US population is aware of that, because it has this nutritional halo of Cheerios.
right. And it's one of the first foods that mothers tend to give to their small children. And
Yes,
they
it
market
is.
to that. They market about how it's the right size for those little toddler fingers.
Yes, it is directly marketed to mothers with young children. Absolutely.
Right. Okay, let's look at the next, these closest to homemade products. And by the way, I love this too. Neither money nor products are ever accepted to appear. So you are not paid to put these products on your site.
That would be not the point at all. I mean, that would be not
Right.
a good website to go to.
Right.
So there are over 225 categories here. This is basically the review that we were inside of. You don't need to read those unless you're interested. Like if you're buying Old El Paso taco seasoning mix and you love it and you want to see, you might be inside one of the actual reviews. But this page is sort of the summary of the findings from all of the reviews. We consolidated into one place so you can see, and they're in no particular order, but it notes on the far left, hey, again, if I was making this at home, what would be in it? And then, here's the product and the list of none of these things are in this item, like the lemon curd, no corn syrups, no gums, flavors, colors, artificial sweeteners, or chemical preservatives. And there they are. Just scroll down really quickly, like just fly down the list. Like, I mean, you can just see there's, I'll look at like no sugar added fruit spread. We really try to pull out the components of categories to try to address, the individual things that people might be seeking. You can just sort of fly through it. I just wanted to show that, it goes on for, 200 of those categories. And and I've tried to group them into some meaningful groups so that it's easier to navigate.
You can get lost here on your site because there's a lot to look at.
Yes, there is.
It's fantastic. It's a huge amount of labor in this site, I can tell. Yeah.
And I know you talk about avoiding sugar, which I am a proponent of as well, but we do include things like ice cream just because that's part of life. And if you're going to eat one, try, choose one that's got that's the healthier option for an ice cream.
Okay. Banned ingredients. So this is interesting too, because like you said, Whole Foods has their list. There's another store called Earth Fare. They have their list. And so I love this. And we just talked about vanillin last week or the week before. And had a pretty good laugh because a lot of the people in the group didn't understand what vanillin was, that
Where it
it's,
comes from, is that what you're talking about?
go ahead and tell
Some,
them.
some of it, not all of it comes
Yeah.
that way, but some of it, yes, it's true.
Mhm. So citric acid, would you mind telling me the difference with that? Because citric acid is natural, but the manufactured is different. And how do we ever know whether it's manufactured version?
If it just says citric acid, it's manufactured. If it says naturally occurring citric acid, it's from citrus fruit. Historically, citric acid was derived from citrus fruit only because, hey, once upon a time, we didn't have any of these newfangled laboratories to make stuff for us. So, hey, if you put lemon on it, it's like why we put lemon on guacamole to keep it from turning, avocados to keep them from turning. It's the same principle. But very little citric acid that's used today is naturally occurring citric acid because it's considerably more expensive than manufactured citric acid, which actually is created primarily in China in a laboratory utilizing Aspergillus niger, which is also known as black mold, which is why a lot of people have allergic reactions that could be linked to the consumption of citric acid, but perhaps they haven't quite isolated that as a factor of what is creating a reaction in them. So let us know if there's a category that you'd like us to look at.
Well, and speaking of that, right here in the contact,
that's where you would send me a note.
Okay, so over here on the left, I really encourage all of you to subscribe because it's fantastic, just fantastic. Like prior to the Super Bowl, she had one come out like on typical Super Bowl food.
Hey, if you're gonna have guacamole, try this one. Right, exactly.
Right. So I am in the Ingredient Inspector YouTube channel, and
yes,
your subscribers are like growing very quickly. That's good to see. You've just grown a lot just in the last 2 weeks. So I love that your videos, I bet you we can do this.
Dana, the Ingredient Inspector, looking at coffee mate powder versus liquid. What's in coffee mate? On the front of this package, it says it's America's #1 creamer. So let's see what's inside. The majority, almost all of these ingredients are commercial ingredients, which we don't have in our home kitchen. This product is banned at Whole Foods Market for hydrogenated oils and artificial flavor. The Coffee Mate liquid has fewer ingredients, but does also contain a significant amount of commercial ingredients, which are not in our home kitchens. The first 2 ingredients in the powder are corn syrup solids and hydrogenated oils. And the first 2 ingredients in the liquid are water and corn syrup solids. To discover some creamers which are closest to homemade, visit ingredientinspector.org.
Okay. I figured we could do that. It's just a minute long. I hope that came through for everyone to be able to see it. But
that's my neutral voice where I try not to sound like, oh my goodness, look at what's in here.
all right. Thank you so much, Dana.
Of course.